intro and beginning. The first thing I'd like to say before I start this is that I don't hate this game. Unlike other people, I don't hate games, even the ones I dislike. In fact, if I had to play this game again, I would. So let me also say, if you enjoyed this game, that's okay. And like I said before, I subjectively enjoy this game. But it's objectively a bad game, or at least a game with a lot of problems. This is what this video is out to prove. And no, I'm not going to explain why objectively is important, because that'll make this video another hour long. But if you don't believe in it, just for this video at least, pretend it's real. And just to explain the title, I think this is a bad game. So why did I call it a mediocre mess? Well, my friend, I think the foundation of this game, at best, is mediocre, but the execution is a mess, therefore making it a bad game, if not a mediocre mess. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm not like other YouTubers. I do not use cheap tactics like the game's glitches, the frame rate issues, or even the acting, or even the quick time events, or even comparing this game to other games, like the Arkham series. I will be going through this game like you've only played one game before. And of course, I don't mean any hatred or threats to the people who made this game or worked on it. This is not the point of this video. This game is certainly flawed in terms of characters, episodes, and storytelling. And keep in mind, there are things I do like about this game, but I just think there's a lot of bad that outweighs the good. It's hard to even know where to start with this game, because there are a lot of problems with this game, but first we must know the idea behind it before I break it down. The idea behind this game. Nearly 70 years of Batman. That means hundreds if not thousands of Batman stories have already been told, and Telltale knew this, so how would they make this different from all the others? Bruce Wayne. Well, that seemed to be the answer to their problem. You see, the plan was to have the player play as Batman and Bruce Wayne, each having to make their own choices and dealing with their own consequences. Or at least, that was the plan. Another thing to add about this game is that it takes place early in Batman's career, about 1 or 2 years. So there's a sense of origin and familiarity of certain characters and story beats. Now, if you've noticed, that's a lot to juggle. Being a brutal Batman while playing as a playboy Bruce Wayne, while it also being a year one story, while also having them all tied together somehow in a satisfying way, is a lot. Now, I'm all for shooting for the stars, but my god, relax a little. And the thing is, that's not even half of the game. Speaking of which, this game is huge, not in the choices sense like Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Racism, not huge as in length, but rather how much of the story is actually in the game. Every time you feel as if you're finishing up a part of the story, 10 more stories open up for your attention. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm here to find out why. So because of this frustrating formula, I have to change mine. So instead of using a normal review formula, where I go through the game one bit at a time, which would be painful for you and me due to all of the ins and outs of storytelling, instead I'll be doing a 4 breakdown system. First being the intro and beginning, which is what we're in right now. The second one will be an episode by episode breakdown, going through the choices in each episode as well as overall plots, pacing, and every once in a while characters if need be. The third will be individual stories and plots of characters and sometimes choices if necessary. The fourth segment will be the conclusion and overall thoughts about the game as a whole. Also, if you haven't played this game before or watched a playthrough of it, I suggest you do so. Also, I might talk a bit about cinematography, art style, and quick time events, but overall, I'll leave this at the end of the video. Also, I won't give out many ways to fix this game, because that would take too long and waste your time and mine, but I won't be summarizing everything, because that would be a nightmare for me, like I've previously mentioned. When I want to emphasize a point or flaw that I see, I will use the sigh clip. This is a clip I found while editing this video, and also thought it summed up the game as a whole pretty well. I will also be using this profile pic. Just like the sigh clip, it will be used to emphasize some sort of point. Mostly it will be used for the sake of imitation of other YouTubers of this style. This video has been hard to make. I do not make videos like this typically or of this type of style, which is great because it pushes me to do better. Better than I ever have thought possible. The editing is nothing special and I've never been out to accomplish that, but with a friendly bit of input, I have always strived to make my arguments better, which hopefully is what this video will achieve. Sometimes I might call you lower than me, but no, this is all in good humor. Speaking of which, there is very little of it in this review. I did this to be as analytical as possible. It's not that there isn't any humor in this video, it's just not the focus. Also, I won't give out many ways to fix this game. That would take way too long and would be a waste of your and my time. Of course, enjoy the video, and feel free to criticize me in the comments below, or if you strongly disagree with me, debate me in my Discord. Feel free. For your first episode, you'd expect it to be a banger, right? Something that grabs the viewer's attention and gets them invested. But instead, it's pretty boring. Because nothing happens. Well, stuff happens, but none that affects the plot. All of it is boring introduction and pointless choices that don't affect you or your story. Don't believe me? Let me show you. The decisions you have in this episode goes as the following. The first is, did you stick up for Harvey in front of Falcone? Which literally changes nothing except for a few lines with or without Harvey, and changes nothing in terms of characters or influences. Did you provide a quote for Vicky's story? Which comes down to, do you want to hear your voice at the end of the chapter or not? Changing nothing with the public, no matter how good or bad the response is. Did you break the dock shooter's arm? I'll get to that in a minute. Who did you give the Falcone data to? Which makes no difference, except for a few dialogue interactions that have no consequences no matter how bad. How did Batman deal with Falcone at the end? Now this is where it gets a bit weird. You think a choice like this would have major consequences, right? But it doesn't. Other than Gordon saying, my cops are terrified of you, and Gordon saying he's out of control, but other than saying that, it doesn't change anything, even though he did it on live TV, and for some reason that doesn't change the public's views on Batman at all. Side note, public opinion never matters, mostly due to the fact it never affects you in a positive or negative way. The not brutal Batman versus the brutal Batman because of this never works, therefore making options like how did Batman deal with Falcone at the end and did you break the dock shooter's arm null and void. Now, let's talk about the episode itself, since we got all the decisions out of the way. Now, I don't know if this is Telltale's formula or not, but based off of Batman Season 1 and 2, I'm going to assume it is. The first episode is its own season in a way. The episode focuses, or at least tries to, on one antagonist while it sets up future story points and plots in the background. The focus/antagonist is Falcone. Well, at least we think he is. We start off in some kind of robbery and we're stopping it as Batman. You meet Catwoman, then the Children of Arkham and Gordon. Alright, I'll give it some slack. It's getting started, warmed up. It's an important introduction. Very important characters, understandable for sure. Okay, now we're at a party, and I mean, it's time to introduce us to Harvey and Falcone. Okay. Just make sure we don't get distracted on anything else. Then we waste 10 to 20 minutes with Oswald for no reason because Oswald isn't needed until late episode 2, because he doesn't do anything other than saying hi, bye. And even though the time you meet him as Bruce, he acts like a completely different person. And when we see him as Batman, he is no different, really, other than another introduction. And even then, you don't technically need him because he doesn't start off until episode 3. And when we see him as Batman, it makes no difference, really, other than another introduction. And even then, you don't technically need him because he doesn't start doing anything until episode 3. In fact, having him leading the terrorist attacks makes no sense, but I'll get to that later. Him being a threat doesn't really come until episode 3, unless you count leading a terrorist organization that can basically be done on its own and better off without him. Oh, sorry, I won't do that again. Where was I? Oh yeah, back to intros. Well, as long as we stay on track, everything should be okay. Or I guess not, just make a whatever. Okay, how much time do we have left? Oh yes, another 20 to 30 minutes down the drain once again. And the last 30 minutes of this episode pretends to be all about Falcone this whole time, and you didn't know it. Wonderful. Okay, let's wrap this up. Some things in this episode are quite good, I must admit. I like the intro as the players get to do something right off the bat, and sadly this was the only time you get to play 2 scenes at once. I kind of like the campaign stuff, but I'll get to that when I talk about Harvey, and everything else feels like a waste of my time. Hey, check out this Wayne corruption thing you'll only develop in the next episodes, but look how cool it is, right? Hey, look, check out Oswald. Do you see him right there? Yeah, he's the penguin. He doesn't look very much like the penguin, but he looks cool, right? Well, we'll get to that next episode. Hey, have you seen the Children of Arkham? Yeah, do you get my point? The one thing in this episode that should be good is the main antagonist. Speaking of which, let's talk about Falcone. The Mob Sucks, Part 1. The Year 1 stories are pretty interesting, mostly due to the fact that Batman is fighting the mob and corruption over crazy and colorful maniacs. To me, at least, the Year 1 era is showing of the difference of one man can make to crime. So it's like nature itself must manifest into something new, hence Batman's villains. As you can tell, I'm quite a nut for Batman. Back on track. Falcone is the most cut and dry villain I've ever seen. Yeah, he's that bad. I'm so sick of the I do bad things for the overall good. I think it's worse than the I do bad things because I'm a bad guy. Funny how we never get to see Falcone do something bad for the overall good. Actually, thinking about it, no wonder Falcone is such a flat villain. The only time he has actual story time is at the beginning of this episode, and the very end of the episode, and then the very beginning of episode 2. That makes more sense now. And when he is on screen, he's being the most generic bad guy 3004 he could possibly be. This wouldn't be much of a problem if your choices with Falcone actually did something, but there is one line that Falcone says that is quite interesting.
Between your businesses and mine, I bet we employ half the city.
Which is a nice choice. Do you work with the devil for the overall good of the city, or not? Until you realize this does nothing, no matter if you treat him well or not. Because the next time you talk to him, there are totally different reasons, which makes your last conversation null and void. It's sad to say, but Falcone is only there for plot convenience, not as a character or a villain. Overall, episode 1 is a mess of introductions, bad villains, and unaffected choices. I'm hoping episode 2 will be much better. So this episode isn't nearly as boring as the last one, but boy does it suffer in quality. Alright, first things first. Did you ease Falcone's pain or make him suffer? This choice actually changes nothing, because Falcone dies anyway. Did you kiss Selina? This choice instead should be named, Did you try and kiss Selina? This doesn't change anything in terms of story or characters. Did you visit Mayor Hill as Bruce or Batman? Now, I like this choice for a few different reasons. One, it plays into the idea that this game was built on, aka choose which best is for the situation, Bruce or Batman. 2 totally different situations happen because of this one choice. Did you withdraw your funding for Harvey's campaign? This actually doesn't matter after you made this decision, it's never mentioned again. I could be wrong about this, but in both of my playthroughs where I made both choices, it was never mentioned after this choice. Did you save Selina or Harvey? Now this is an effective choice for about a few episodes, but it's still a good choice. Well, it's a good choice if you choose to save Selina, because it seems to have ramifications. Selina is very thankful, and Harvey seems deeply in pain and literally scarred for life. But if you take the other choice, it's like it never happened, because the same cause of events still happen, except without a half-burned face and Selina's being a little bit more pissy than usual, but other than that, it's fine. Now, time to talk about the plot holes in this episode. How is Montoya able to fire at Falcone while Jim is right at the front door? Why doesn't Batman throw Penguin in jail after he knows Montoya was drugged by someone who said the same thing about revolutions and had the same motivation as him? He knew Falcone died before one of his employees did. Isn't that enough to bring him in for questioning? Especially after him doing the most generic bad guy speech of "You're one of us, join us," and him still going after Catwoman? call Commissioner Gordon, and at least for the sake of argument, let's just say they're not on good terms. Send the evidence you have on Penguin anonymously. Wow, for the world's greatest detective, you're pretty dumb. Also, I think the funniest part is when Cobblepot, which is clearly Penguin, goes on stage on television, talks with the voice, and says, "You killed my mom," which is the lady shown in the video. Her name was Miss Cobblepot, and the next episode, the main public just completely seems to forget about it. But let's step back for a second. How good was this episode? Well, it's better than the first. The episode in terms of being more interesting and investing than the last episode. But it takes a while to get there, about 35 minutes exactly. While it's getting better in terms of pacing, its quality seems to suffer. So let's see if that trend continues. To this episode's credit, it's a lot more interesting than the last two. There's also better choices, at least some, and the plot is actually moving at a watchable pace, but you know the drill. Choices are up first. Help Harvey or help Montoya? Mostly good because of the stakes and characters, or better yet, your relationship with said character. Although it does have a bit of a problem, but I'll get to that later, so put that in your memory spots in your brain in the meantime. Did you keep your composure with Oswald? This is an easy no-brainer. Even Oswald is pretty hateable, but most people won't actually hit him. Not just because the data supports this, but because it has no real reward, except temporary satisfaction. That too, and you realize you're playing as Batman, right? The guy known for beating up bad guys. So even if you did have a bitter hatred of him, you know, I'm probably gonna have to beat this guy up later. Did you ask Lucius to stay at Wayne Enterprises or come work with you? This one really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things, but on the smaller level, it does its job well. Something I like about this choice is that it comes to effect in episode 4 and 5, not in 3. And some of those things are neat. Example, by keeping Lucius, you get a strobe grenade and a brand new batsuit. And by keeping Lucius, you get nothing. And the funny thing is that the game taunts you with this idea that you could have done something or tried to stop it, but if you made the choice to keep Lucius at Wayne Enterprises, it doesn't change anything. I could be wrong, but after checking a few times, I don't think having Lucius at Wayne Enterprises does anything other than the tech that I've mentioned. Did you romance Selena? If you want a relationship with Selena, you'll do it. And if you don't want a relationship with Selena, then you won't do it. Or you'll do it anyway and then dick her over later. This choice is pretty obvious. Did you beat up Harvey or did you take it easy on him? And this choice doesn't matter, and if it did, most players are going to choose not harming him. It's a pretty easy no-brainer choice. Now, overall, it certainly paced a lot better. The one thing that I thought dragged on a little was the part where Regina came up to talk to you, only to go back down to your secret lair, only to come back up again to talk. That was weird. I know they were trying to give a quick explanation about how the children of Arkham are hacking into Wayne's tech, since it will become a vocal point of the next episode, but put it in a better place, before the talk with Regina, or after, not in between. I like Harvey being super paranoid in this situation, like leading up to the mass takeover by him, but I'll talk about that in my Harvey section. The Vicky interview as Batman is a great idea, but of course wasted. This interview has no consequences. Out of curiosity, I left the recorder on, and it did nothing. So may I ask, what was the point of it? Also, don't you think whatever newspaper organization Vicky works at would be very skeptical of her, and even despise her, basically giving free press to a terrorist? Alright, so let's use an example. Do you think somebody that did the same thing Vicky did, but instead of a terrorist, she interviewed a Nazi, how do you think that would go over well? Yeah, exactly. Also keep the hover boots and Sonic staff in mind. Anyway, the Penguin stuff is neat and adds some much needed development, and I like the ending. Being sent to Arkham is a pretty cool idea. The reveal though kind of confuses me when it's too early for most people would do it, either in late episode 4 or early episode 5 to reveal it, but this one only creates more problems instead of solving them. Anyway, certainly much better in terms of pacing than the last 2 episodes. As per usual in the Telltale game, the 4th episode is the best, not just because of its great pacing, characters, choices and consequences, and even plot twists. It's that they all throw side choices, side plots, side characters, all as the main focus in this episode. So characters like Harvey Dent and Penguin are the main villains, while Lady Arkham doesn't actually get an appearance. Yeah, an explanation for her motives, more on that in my Lady Arkham section, but not an appearance. I'd say the plot is better off for it, which isn't a good thing if your side villains are more interesting than your main one, but I digress. For once, the overwhelming feeling of being Batman juggling multiple villains is well executed. Granted, most of it is at the end, but at least it's built up. But how is the choices themselves? You know what it's time for. Did you promise Joker a favor? I like this decision, even though I know it won't affect anything until the next game. But anytime a villain presses you into making a certain choice or decision, you're always very careful about your choice or decision, especially when you know it's the Joker. Did you go along with Joker's plan? This one's a bit weird to me, because you're getting out no matter what. 1. 2, if this was a moral choice to put some important life at line instead of just some random patient, it would be a lot more effective. The point is, it doesn't matter in terms of consequences or choice, so I won't count it either. How did you get past the Enforcer's barricade? This choice is more about world building than an actual choice, which isn't bad, but it's not worth talking about. Did you deal with Harvey as Bruce or Batman? I might talk about these choices / sections about choosing between Bruce or Batman later. Cough cough, wink wink. Oh, I was supposed to act that out. Whoopsie. Did you stop Harvey or Oswald? Everything about this choice is well planned, whether through talking with Harvey and how the tech isn't working, to the action scenes both having him to do without tech and just raw human skill, to consequences after this choice, and even down to the flashbacks showing how far they've gone to be friend to enemy. Yeah, down to the individual characters and motivations, there are many flaws, but from a choice standpoint and the execution of that choice, it's pretty on point. Now, overall, it's pretty good, and this is what Telltale's formula works within, an episodic setting. In fact, I think that's why the story in this episode is the best. Not only because of the main villain doesn't make any sense, but because it simplifies the goals. Instead of one stretched out goal of take down the children of Arkham, it flows with whatever the plot needs to flow. Now, some of you might be asking, why does episode 1 not work while this episode does? Well, my underlings, it all comes down to how the plot flows. What I mean by this is, while this episode focuses on side villains, making their narrative more focused on how you want to defeat them, versus episode 1 is focused on introducing characters, which meaninglessly shoves intros into the way of the plot instead of flowing with it, if that makes any sense. Oh, and pun not intended. So, overall, good. But let's see if we can continue this quality into the next episode. Episode 5 starts off strong with an immediate sense of conflict and tension, but sadly it loses this after the intro. It seems to just fade away. But you know it's up first. The first choice is whether you went after Harvey or Oswald in the last episode. What did you do with Harvey's coin? This one's a bit unnecessary of a choice, but it basically comes down to throw him off a balcony or not. Which is nice if you're into that kind of thing. Did you distract Penguin long enough for Gordon to get the job done? This one's just a win or lose scenario. There's no meaning on commenting about it, other than saying this game could easily use more of this. That does it for extra choices. Now back to normal. Did you blame Alfred's involvement with Thomas Wayne? This one's such a stupidly obvious choice, I don't even need to look at the statistics for it to know that people didn't blame Alfred. How did you respond to Selina? I'll save this one for my Catwoman section, but I'll tell you this. She is nothing more than a thief. Did you take off the cowl? This one doesn't matter in the end because Lady Arkham dies anyway, but I like the sacrifice or a piece of an ear or an eye as punishment for either choice. Did you attend Gordon's address as Bruce or Batman? This one's more of a personal choice than a strict between a tight situation left or right choice. This one also ties into the themes that started this whole Batman project in the first place, so it makes sense that it would be the last choice. Like I said, it starts off strong with an immediate sense of conflict and tension, but sadly it loses that after the intro. The reason why is because you go from an immediate sense of conflict and danger to just waiting for Lady Arkham to do something, only to wait for the plot to progress. to stop again because of
Looks like we're back where we started.
Catwoman. And when it does get interesting, it isn't nearly as thrilling as the beginning of the episode. Oh, and just for fun, if you don't choose Two-Face, for some reason he burns down the entirety of Wayne Manor, only to somehow easily get back in it, only with minor burns and damages. Sure. Also, if you don't choose Penguin, for some reason he doesn't find out Batman's identity, even though he's easily taken over not just Batman's tech, but all of Wayne's tech, and still not able to find out Batman's identity. Even though it's explained earlier, if he had all of Wayne's tech, he would know Batman's secrets. Oops. Anyway, in conclusion, it's hard to put my thumb on it, because at the beginning and at the end, it's on the same level in terms of great pacing like episode 4 and 3, but in the middle it's just boring, like episode 1. The quality is the same though. The first half is just as many problems as episode 2, but the last half is the quality somewhere in between episode 4 and 3. And the only reason why I haven't talked about half of the problems is because 90% of them are all about Lady Arkham. So as well as it tries, it doesn't come close in terms of a good ending. It's pretty mixed at best, which is pretty ironic because I think the last episode describes the game as a whole pretty well. It's a real shame, because I see the potential. No, it's AI, not IA. God damn it, Sony Vegas.
You don't understand, Batman. Without me, Gotham is doomed. Who will stop Lady Arkham? The Penguin.
As long as I'm around, Gotham will be fine. They don't need someone like you.
No. I'm important. I'm important! If you insist. No! Bruce. I don't know what to do. I can't decide. It's too much. It's too much. I can't.
A safer Gotham, Harvey. Just like you wanted.
Wherever they put me, whatever they do, I'll get out. I'm coming for you, Wayne. Nowhere is safe. You're gonna die.
I'm gonna get you help, Harvey. We will get you better.
I am better, Wayne. I'm the best I've ever been. Oh, you'll see. I'm not done yet.
Harvey's story. If you make the right choices, he makes sense. Alright, let's start with something that isn't Harvey's fault. The choices you make will affect your characters, right? And do these choices, different choices, will create a different character. So how do you do this with a pre-existing character, with a set personality, set of motives, and other things as well? Answer, you don't find this answer, but you try. So in this section, I won't yet talk about the choices that don't hurt Harvey. Instead, I'll talk about the ones that do. I promise, it'll be quick. So as you may or may not know, I played this game twice. In one playthrough, I was nice to Harvey as I possibly could be, out of curiosity, and I end up with a Harvey that makes no sense. He has no rhyme or reason for being crazy, and has no harm done to him, yet he feels he must do harm to others. So in the end of the story, instead of me feeling like I could have stopped this, I'm just confused. As how he suddenly went crazy, just in this path at least, because of one shot of anger juice, that's confirmed to only last for like a few hours. And the worst part is they could have continued to replace him with any other character to continue his place in the plot. But sadly, no. No setup. Now, if you take the path I didn't take in my second playthrough, the one that causes a lot of problems for Harvey, how is he? Well, it's a mixed bag, but let me start off by saying this. After going through all the characters, I'd easily say Harvey's the best. You can think of this as a positive or negative thing. It's up to you. Now back into the analysis / review of Harvey. So, first problem with Harvey is the build-up, or lack thereof. The first 2 episodes are completely void of Two-Face. In fact, it's so void of Two-Face, if you told me that he was Two-Face without the name Harvey Dent, I wouldn't believe you. And that's my problem. Instead of using this time to slowly turn into Two-Face by showing hints at underlying anger and or underlying new character, instead he just seems normal. And that's the thing, I wouldn't mind if it didn't build up to him becoming Two-Face, but because it is, it makes it a waste of time. And you can't say that isn't his story, because after episode 2, then he finally starts developing as Two-Face. Then he starts showing the cracks in his character. Is that what they're trying to show us? But right after episode 2, he tells us that this was a previously told problem. And now I know why? Why I have issues with this is that it's the typical problem of telling instead of showing. But how is his actual character in episode 2 without the build-up? Before the storm. He's pretty meh, I'd say. Most of the time he's being used as a plot device. Don't believe me? Example. How do Selena and Bruce meet? Through Harvey. How can Bruce talk to Falcone even though he's already been detained? Through Harvey. How do you meet Vicky Vale and Falcone in the first place? Through Harvey. There are other examples, but I think you get the idea. But him as a character, he's okay. The best way I can describe him is that he's your typical friend with fun plot conveniences that I've already talked about. In fact, the only interesting thing that he is a hypocrite. He says he wants to stop corruption, but he's working with Falcone, the most corrupt man in Gotham, to get elected. But as soon as I sing praises, it gets dropped harder than JFK's assassination. I can't believe I wrote that in the script. Something's wrong with me. So it's hard to see the upside in this. But now that you know that, I can build upon my section about his transformation into Two-Face. The payoff for Two-Face was either rushed or misunderstood. So, does he finally become a breakout character when he fully becomes Two-Face? Again, not really. But one thing I find is unbelievably dumb is how much he cares about Catwoman. I mean, I get it. It sucks. Your girlfriend breaks up with you. Tough luck. But that wouldn't make his main reasons why he becomes Two-Face. And we know this every time he has a breakdown, he mentions her. And it's so annoying. Let me explain why. The idea of Two-Face is interesting because it's a tale of a once ordinary man, by the law, completely to the letter, to a man relying on a coin to choose his morality. Again, another example of this is his paranoia about the children of Arkham, and how that turns him into an authoritarian dictator due to anarchist. Make sense? Not only because in reality, anarchy always leads to an authoritarian government, but also in a sense that mass paranoia can lead anyone to being hyper-controlling. And that's not the part that doesn't make sense, because by all accounts, that's good. The problem is right at the end of the story where he starts suddenly using the coin and acts like Two-Face. But why? You didn't build up to this. You instead used your time to make him a dictator, which is good, but then he suddenly starts acting like a comic book villain. Good joke, I know. It just goes against what you previously built. That's the definition of shooting yourself in the foot. So in conclusion of this massive study of a character, we're left with a character / villain that doesn't make any sense if you make certain decisions, that has no setup, that is mediocre as a character before Two-Face, if not a plot device, and then turns into Two-Face with very little subtlety due to a lack of build-up, leading to the very, very confusing, but not in a good way, character. To put it simply, we're left with a very below average character, and I'd say Harvey's still one of the best characters, because while it fails with its end goal, there are parts, if you make the right decisions of course, that are well thought out and talented behind it. Like I previously mentioned, paranoia and dictatorship when in leadership, it's just that the execution and lack of development that's really the problem here.
Maybe you think it'll save you, eh? Ha! But guess what? It won't! Oh, bloody hell! Bruce! You bastard!
You got a lot to answer for.
Oh, you bloody pigs! How's this for an answer?
Is that all you got? I didn't see a thing. Freedom is rights. I gotta admit, you surprised me. You were right about this one. Gotham owes you a debt. The GCPD does too. I won't forget it. Thank you.
I didn't do this for gratitude, Lieutenant.
When you've been fighting crime in Gotham as long as I have, you take your thanks where you can get them.
You think this changes anything, do ya? Lady Arkham's gonna have your heads served up on a platter.
He has a point. We just took down Lady Arkham's top man. She's not gonna stand for this.
No, she isn't.
I never thought I'd say this, but I hope to God that Batman has a better idea where she is than we do.
This isn't the end, Batman! You can't stop us!
It didn't have to be like this, Oswald. You should have given up when you had the chance.
Give up! Oh, I've already won. Now you can do whatever you want to me, but Lady Arkham's plans are already in motion.
Where is she? What is she planning?
The message is the same as it's ever been. We will open your eyes! This city's hypocrisy will be exposed!
Tell me where to find her.
Piss off! I'm not telling you anything.
Tell me!
I won't tell you. Do your worst.
Not the Penguin. Alright, let's start from the top. Who's Penguin? Well, in the comics and every adaptation of Penguin, he's a man obsessed with money, or that seems to be his goal. The rest of the character can be completely different from one to another. Example, in some versions he used to be rich, but his family was destroyed by the Waynes, and in others he's a poor from the start and has to work his way up. In some versions, he's straight up just a killer and a leader of a gang. In some others, he's a questionable businessman. But they all share one goal: money and influence. Okay, well this Penguin has none of that. Well, the backstory of he used to have rich parents, yes, but everything else, no. Maybe if you squint your eyes hard enough, maybe you could say he's a gang leader, but that's a big maybe. But two things. One, it's not a gang, they're terrorists. And two, he's not the leader. Lady Arkham is. He's more of a second in command. So that's one similarity down. What about appearance? Well, Penguin in the comics and adaptations are and/or short, has a monocle, has a British accent, dressed well, and of course, the classic umbrella. Telltale's Penguin only has one of these, so you're basically just making a totally different character with the same name as a different character, with only 2 similarities. My problem isn't that the Penguin's different from past interpretations, it's just baffling to me as to why you choose to have Penguin when he's a borderline new character when you could have had used someone else. So let's see. What's Penguin's traits? Well, he has a thing for anarchy, sees potential in Batman, hates the system like corruption and government, Gamers Rise Up style, isn't capable of fighting Batman toe-to-toe, and I wonder. I'll put a pin in that for now, but for the more informed viewers, will know who I'm talking about. Very hateable. There is one thing I like about him, or one thing that he's supposed to do that he does well. Something that none of these villains have. He's hateable. Now, this doesn't start until episode 3, but when it actually gets some traction, there are many ways they pull this off. 1, he takes away what's rightfully yours. This is a natural instinct that we have since childhood. I like what I have. If somebody takes it, I will be mad. Simple as that. 2, he mocks you for your trauma. You hate it when somebody makes fun of you or something you're invested in or connected with. Again, simple. 3, he kicks you while you're down. Nobody likes to be made fun of when they're at their worst hour. Yet again, simple. Now, of course, back to the negatives, because there aren't many positives to talk about. Trust me, I'm trying. So one thing I like about good characters, and something that's a basic necessity for a character, is consistency. The thing is, Penguin doesn't have this, especially at the start. Let me show you. In the beginning, he seems like a lost friend, trying to connect with you after several years, but he seems to be on the wrong path. But when you later meet with him as Bruce, he's clearly trying to annoy you, like he wants something, like he needs something from you, with no remorse, when there wasn't a hint of this at your first talk. The most baffling thing is that he calls back to this in his first talk. And for the sake of the argument, let's just say it was a part of the plan. Why would he act like his friend only to flip on him the next time they talk? It makes no sense. What purpose does it serve? And while I'm at it, if you felt like the time with Penguin was underdeveloped, you're not the only one. Because the first few times you talk with him, they're either introductions, like I've explained before in my episode 1 section, where they've met twice, once as Bruce and then one as Batman, even though there was no reason to. Or just as Lady Arkham's pawn, where he just does what he's told. And this leads to Penguin being underdeveloped. Especially when you realize that in total, Penguin has 6 scenes. 6 scenes in total. And 3 of which we can cut down due to what I've previously said, which brings them down to 3. And tell me if I'm wrong by saying this, but this is not enough for a side villain. In conclusion, the story builds him up as an important character / villain. But when he falls short, we have a hollow villain that doesn't even come close to his comic book counterpart, and even if we separate him as his own thing, he doesn't even stand on his own. Part of this is their own fault, giving him so few scenes and only some of them making any sense in terms of the actual character. I can only put the blame on them. There's very few people that like this character or this adaptation of Penguin, and I'm starting to understand why. This is probably the worst character in the game, but then again, I haven't even covered Lady Arkham yet. Wish me luck. Before I go though, just use Anarchy. I'd personally use Anarchy instead of Penguin.
This is quite the social event, Mr. Wayne.
Oh, come on now, so formal. Call me Bruce.
Well, Bruce, you've been going around pleasing everyone tonight. But how are you doing? You should enjoy your own party before all the champagne runs out.
Everyone loves the host. You're king for a day.
Just a day? I would have guessed Bruce Wayne has that feeling year-round.
Interesting how you speak to him. So familiar. Alfred? Such concern for someone you've never met before.
Concern I don't have for you.
Huh. Sounds like deflection to me. There's more here than you're telling. It makes me wonder, do you really care? Only one way to find out.
Batman, don't you...
Shut up, old man! You've seen my true self. Your turn. Prove that you can. Take off your mask. Let me see the man you really are. You're only a piece in the bigger game, but you're the only piece I have left.
Alfred!
What if me bad guy though? How? The reason why most reveals happen differently, for example, the protagonist or side character figures out the identity out, or the bad guy shows them in their last conflict. Either way, they understand how or even why the bad guy is bad. But you see, they either forgot or were just too stupid, because after they reveal, they have to make this shit up that you didn't know before, because it makes no sense otherwise. But one thing at a time. Foreshadowing is not character development. I thought we've been over this already with Game of Thrones, but fine. Foreshadowing is nothing in terms of character development. Yes, it hints at character changes, but that's only half the battle. The lead up to the character change has to occur to make this possible and coherent, or else you run the risk of making your character and the audience's impressions of that said character and story. Now, after explaining that, you can see the problem. Lady Arkham's problem isn't that she's a sociopath. Her problem is that she's a sociopath with no reason to be a sociopath, because of foreshadowing and a cheap plot twist. The stupid explanation for the motives. Now, the actual motivation. Is it worth it? Or better yet, does it make sense? Do you want to know what it is? Child abuse. Yeah, that makes her a terrorist. To be fair, her original parents were murdered, then she was locked into Arkham, then she was adopted by the Vales, only then to be abused. Which, number one, that's the most confused and convoluted origin I think I've ever heard. Two, just because you go through child abuse doesn't make you a terrorist, or a good enough excuse for you to be a villain. I don't even know how to properly express this. The best part is, Lady Arkham would probably be more shy and insecure due to this abuse than the exact opposite. I just hate the excuse that she's crazy when you can use better forms of storytelling or better writing, but boy, we're not even at the best part. Somehow, she can go toe-to-toe with Batman. Okay, fine. I can get behind the she's crazy thing more than I can get behind her actually being able to go against Batman toe-to-toe and winning. When she happens to have no training beforehand, fine, I'll get behind the she's a good fighter, just for the sake of argument. How can she win against Batman? Like, how? He's able to go against a small army on his own with little to no tech, and somehow he loses to a small white journalist with a staff. And the best part is, this is never explained, where or how she gets her training from. But that's not even the best part. Wait, what? The best part is, wait for it, hover boots! So, first, how? How on earth did she get technology like the bow staff and the hover boots on a news reporter's salary? Did she make them? Did she get them from someone else? Did she? And so on and so forth. And yet again, just like her combat skills, it's never explained how or why she has these things. Let that sink in. Conclusion. In the end, we're left with one of the worst villains I've seen in a while. The plot twist makes no sense. The explanation of these plot twists don't make any sense after the fact. The no explanation for not only how she can go head to head with Batman and win, and have technology that's never explained, no matter how you spin it. These are facts about the character that haven't been explained, but also are poorly executed. Just use Azrael for combat and Scarecrow for ideas. I think I could easily replace her with two different people for two different reasons. Azrael for her combat skills, and Scarecrow for his ideals and his use of drugs.
Spill it, Falcone, while you still can.
It's the Waynes. They're behind all this.
What do you mean?
You wanna save this city? Well, the Waynes are the biggest gangsters in Gotham.
Wayne's corruption. Mostly used for plot reasons. Wayne's corruption kind of goes nowhere. Well, it does. Well, let me back up first. The big problem is that it builds up like it's important, like it has some sort of consequence. Not that it can't build up to have something only to subvert the player's expectations, but instead it just forgets about it. Example, in episode 1, it's revealed at the end that this may be more than rumors. At the start of episode 2, you start asking questions about Bruce's parents. And at the end, it's completely revealed that Bruce's parents, or at least Thomas, are terrible people that abuse their power. 1/4 in episode 3, Bruce gets replaced with Penguin, aka Oswald, aka Fake British Man, and at the end, Bruce gets sent to the asylum, further proving to the public he's like his father. In the very beginning of episode 4, he gets attacked, twice. By the way, this is the only time public opinion matters. Also, both of these are mandatory with no choices required. At the end of episode 4, I guess you could say it's all about Wayne's corruption, but this is more about Harvey and Oswald than Wayne's corruption because these are just motivations, not the causes. But if you do disagree, I understand. So even if you do think Harvey and Oswald are a part of the Wayne corruption story rather than the motivation, why does it stop after dealing with Harvey and Oswald? And even if you think because they are the main reason and focus of the Wayne corruption plot, why does the public just forget about it? No protest, no anything. I thought that was the whole point of the Wayne corruption story's role in episode 4, was that people were getting involved, showing how much they hated him, and how clearly the public had an effect on this. And then at the end, it's just suddenly fixed. Really? Are you sure? All this anger just swept under the rug? But again, after all that, the Wayne Company is just fine? After a murder/terrorist took over as CEO? Okay, maybe Bruce will get his job back after all this. But the company isn't taking any action to try and fix this right after. The story just doesn't mention it. It just asks the player to forget about this, sweep this all aside, and even though it was a main focal point of the story, it's just forgotten. That's disappointing, lackluster, and terrible writing.
It's not complicated. I'm not a good person. I'm certainly no hero, and I don't want to be. I'm a thief. That's all I am. I told you that from the start. I never pretended to be anything else.
You're right. You're a thief. And nothing more.
Glad we agree. It's not complicated. I'm not a good person. I'm certainly no hero, and I don't want to be. I'm a thief. That's all I am. I told you that from the start. I never pretended to be anything else.
Stop. It's not true. I know there's more to you than that. You're just afraid to admit it.
You'd like it if that were true, wouldn't you? Why would you even think that? I've made my feelings pretty clear.
You saved my life. You could have left me to die back in that warehouse, but you didn't. Someone who's only out for herself, who's just a thief, wouldn't do that.
Oh yeah? Who would?
A good person. That's who. A hero.
Catwoman. Her and plot don't mix. After going through hours of footage of this game, a funny thing occurred to me. Catwoman really isn't in this game. Sure, in the first episode she seems to be important, but after all of her scenes explaining as to why she is or isn't in other scenes, it just seems like she's just following the plot, rather than having her own journey or story of her own. My example of this is in episode 3, where she happens to be there conveniently when Batman tries to stop Lady Arkham. Which, by the way, the amount of scenes you have with Catwoman per episode that are mandatory, of course, that's after episode 1 are 2 in episode 2 and 3, and 1 appearance in episode 4 and 5. So make of that what you will. A bad relationship. I think the way to say is that it was a relationship that was just tacked on, or even unneeded. Not only just because you have little scenes with her, but because there's nothing happening between the two. And for those of you that question this because they worked together once, doesn't mean they're immediately besties, or good enough to suddenly jump into a relationship. Also, no matter what decision you make to or with her, you can easily sleep together. So again, I ask, what's the point of this relationship if you can just sleep with her no matter what? Oh yeah, that's right, because Harvey has to get mad. Do you see what I mean when I say the plot and Catwoman work against each other? Or when I say there's no relationship here. It's just thrown together as a way to make the player feel like they have a choice. But in the end, that's all that it is. It's a feeling. A bad character due to weird moral grayness. Now, what do I mean by bad? Just to clarify, not bad as in suffering inequality, but bad in terms of evil. Now, this is subjective, but I'll make this as objective as I possibly can. You see, Catwoman is not just the most morally upright in this game, but it tries to make her actions morally just. Let me explain. At first, it's clear that she's a thief, right? But the thing is, that's what makes her interesting, is that she questions your motivations. Which is nice, it gives the player motivation rather than just doing it for them. Now remember that, I'm not done with it yet. Later, she admits that she's only dating Harvey because she doesn't care about him. And she doesn't care about how many people get killed due to Penguin. Then after she saves you, she suddenly walks this whole thing back. She says she feels bad for stealing, even though at the beginning she seems like she didn't care at all, and she even said before that she was into it because of the thrill. Then again, she walks this back in episode 5, saying everything she did was a job. So which is it? Nothing more than a job and don't care about the people? Or you do care about Batman and people? And don't you dare use the argument that she's suddenly a morally gray character. I'd say that's wrong, because there's a difference between a morally gray character and then just a hypocrite at one point to another. Trying to see the other side of the argument. I like to do this with movies, political issues, and games. I try my best to play both sides. I think everyone should do this at some point in their lives. I'm mostly doing this because most people believe that this is the strongest positive of this game. So I'll be showing possible positives for Catwoman in this game, and then I'll be knocking them down. The reason why I'm doing this for Catwoman and not anybody else is because, like I've already mentioned, it's the strongest positive people keep mentioning, and also this is kind of new for a review format for me, so I'm generally very uncomfortable with it. So it'll feel like I'm addressing them face to face, well, sort of. She and Bruce have good chemistry. First off, no. Like I've mentioned and explained before, they do not have any chemistry. They do not work off of each other in any special way, and there is no special dynamic that they have. And the bit that they do have is lost after episode 1. She's a 3-dimensional character. No. Making decisions that are flat out bad to suddenly acting straight up right, I understand what they're trying to do, but when it's actually executed, it makes no sense. A good example of this is her working with terrorists only, even though in the next scene she helps you out. These things don't make much sense. She's sometimes loyal in some scenes, but in others she admits that she's not. Here's my question. Why not just give her a character arc? It's simple, it makes sense, it works, and it makes life so much easier than what you're actually trying to do. So to wrap this up, these arguments are very weak. They have little to no evidence to them. Like I said, there's a difference between being a morally gray character to just making decisions that make no sense. Not only this, but having a good chemistry just doesn't make any sense. And if you still think so, ask yourself, what's the difference or special about this Catwoman that's different than any other Catwoman? But even as her own thing, there's nothing special. Conclusion, she's nothing more than a thief. In the end of Catwoman's story, you have a choice. Is or isn't she nothing more than a thief? After giving you all the evidence I've collected, her and the plot working against each other by only having a few scenes, the tacked on relationship, and her at times being manipulative of evil actions, I think we can safely say Catwoman is bad. But not because it's just the plot's fault, but because what she does as a character. And I haven't even talked about how she's literally helped a terrorist organization, not once, but twice. And one of them was chemical warfare use on civilians. But that isn't even my problem with her. My problem is how she gets treated like it's just a simple mistake, and can be easily forgotten, and not a single pathway that you get to choose to treat her like the criminal she is, except this one. So, if I can make any difference, I would ask if you would choose the choice to call her a thief, because to be honest, she's much worse. Which, by the way, in episode 2, she's shown to have worked with Batman against the Children of Arkham, yet in episode 3, she is shown to suddenly work with them. Wouldn't they not trust her? Also, worth mentioning is that I don't think she's a terrible person, but she's just a terrible person that I think could have a lot of potential. I think it would greatly benefit from cutting her from the actual game. Since she has such little scenes to begin with, either don't have her in the game to begin with, or give her more scenes to actually work with. You can't do both.
If I stay, I'll have to stop working on our side project. That means no new tech, no repairs if you need them. I could keep an eye on things for you. Let you know what they're up to. Feed you what information I can. But...
No, Lucius, I need you to stay here.
But...
You're the only ally I have in this building. It's important. I need you to be my eyes and ears.
All right, I can do that.
Keep Oswald out of R&D, and let me know if anything comes up.
Keep that drive safe.
Other smaller side characters. Alfred really doesn't matter, but works. One thing I do like about this game consistently is Alfred. Alfred is a nice friendly ear when it comes to advice and choices, so it makes sense to have him in this game. Which, while I believe that most of his and Bruce's dialogue can be cut down, it still sits well with me. It gives the most of the heartwarming scenes, which is nice because it separates itself from all the craziness. While I do believe some fights are unnecessary, it overall has its place in this game. Lucius is okay. Meh. I'm surprised I'm even talking about Lucius because, unsurprisingly, he isn't important. It's clear by how much they use him in the story, he was only made for one choice. And for that one choice, he did good, but one choice isn't a character. Wayne Lady gets forgotten later in the story. And I guess she's worth at least a mention. She's the mentor, but not really, figure, and she's mostly worth mentioning because of her accent. For some reason, at the beginning of the game, she has this old-timey accent, but when you meet her later on in the game, she starts talking normally.
Old families like ours should flock together, you know, like birds. You're being asked to step down from your position as CEO. Effective immediately. At least until this whole mess gets cleaned up.
I'm sorry, but that's the most interesting thing about her character. Joker is good foundation. It's no secret that I like Joker, whether it be through his glimpses of anger, the way he takes advantage of guards, or even the way he has such a friendly demeanor, yet such an uncomfortable feeling around him, is what really sells the character. I also like the idea of having Joker being your best friend, making him uncomfortably close to you at all times, and keeping you on your toes. But while I say all these positive things, when compared to the other Jokers of today, it's hard for this one to stand out. Yes, we have a friendly aspect to him, which to be fair makes him somewhat interesting. His whole overall performance just doesn't stick out, due to all the previous Jokers either being better or more interesting. But for now, it's a good foundation. Something that'll probably come back later. Wink, 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 cough, cough. Jim wants Batman in jail for some reason, but overall okay. Jim's okay, I guess. He's nothing special, or different, or interesting. He's just Jim Gordon. Although there is one problem I do have with old Jimbo. For some reason, earlier on in the game, Jim says multiple times that he wants Batman in jail, rather than helping him. But for some reason, he just forgets about this, and it's never brought up again, so, oopsies. Other mini-villains. I had something planned for this, but I forgot, so, sorry. I just wanted to include this for some humor. Haha. The Mob Sucks, Part 2. The idea that makes the mob so great from a villain standpoint isn't that they're just different from the usual villains that Batman faces. It's the idea. Now, when I mean the mob, I mean the mob and corruption, mostly due to the fact that the game itself uses this as one and the same. The idea of corruption is fascinating from a moral and philosophical standpoint. The reason why I hate it is the way it's used. It had so much potential of that said idea. Batman and Bruce and choice decisions altogether can make this idea flourish into something beautiful. But alas, this wasn't the case. And that's a sorely lost opportunity. The episodes overall. These are the most all over the place in terms of quality I've seen. But for the most part, they get better as we go. But at times, it completely suffers in terms of quality. I think the reason why the first few episodes were so uninteresting and little of actual plot going on was because of the introductions of characters and reintroductions of characters. Again, and again, and again. It's just most of the time is spent on introductions, rather than doing anything with the plot. And when it is related to the plot, it's only relevant for that current episode. So it feels as if most of the episodes were wasted, which isn't a wrong statement. Do I think the plot at the beginning moves at a snail's pace? Yes, but there's generally a good reason for it. But besides the first few episodes, how is it? It's okay, I guess. While there are episodes like 4 that are really good, most of the later episodes are pretty mediocre, if not straight up bad. Now, can the story work with such a poor pacing? Of course. The problems start to arise when you don't use this time as an advantage, or using it to hurt yourself with the plot. That's where the true problems lie. The choices between Bruce and or Batman. I thought this deserved its own section due to this idea being part of the idea of this game. My first problem being is that there are only 3 choices in the whole game that make you choose between Bruce and Batman. Which I shouldn't need to explain why the main idea of this game is so few and why that's bad. But the choices themselves aren't great. Or aren't anything special. I get it, the idea at first is a good one. The idea being taking a problem head-on, one with the clever and powerful Bruce Wayne, or playing as the brutal Dark Knight Batman. But after a while, you realize how hollow this choice is. Let me show you one choice at a time. The first choice, simply take on the mayor as Batman or Bruce Wayne. The reason why this works is because how differently each situation is handled. If you go as Batman, all you have is pure intimidation and fear, while with Bruce Wayne, it's more like having a business deal, where you even get to make the choice whether you actually want to make a morally gray deal with him. This is good and well executed. Now watch as the next 2 choices have none of this. The second choice has none of this. The same will happen no matter what. So let me ask, what's the point of this choice, other than pretending it has meaning? And then we have the third choice, which while it is a nice end choice to the actual game, it doesn't affect anything. So in total we have a few choices to this idea, while also the choices themselves only 1/3 of the time matters. The funny thing is, they could have easily solved their own problem with something that they did in episodes 4 and 5. Alright. Let me explain. In episode 4, there's a choice to go after Penguin or Harvey. The first one you choose, you go as Batman, but the one you go as last is Bruce. Do you see what I mean? I'm not saying make choices for the player, I'm saying to make choices from other choices, if that makes any sense. But sadly, this is only one choice. The idea was promoted by the creators, yet from what's there isn't anything worth talking about that I haven't talked about already. It's a real shame because as long as you make the idea more complex, it could easily work. Would've, should've, could've. At the end of the day, we got a very watered down concept from such a good idea. But it should be known to others because it shows us that a good idea doesn't always mean a good outcome. Villains and how they feel underwhelming and how they can be replaced with better ones and how them being just crazy is not a good argument and or a bad excuse and why there should be more. Wow, that's a long ass title. Now, I've previously talked about why each of them are bad in their own sections, but now as a general problem, what do they share? Well, each case is different, but I think I found a few they all share, as well as arguments used in favor of them. 1. All of them being underdeveloped. I've never seen so much time spent to such underdeveloped characters and villains. I find this not only ironic, but tragic, but how they do this differently each case to case. Two-Face is because the lack of build-up, and Lady Arkham not having anything explained either in terms of motivation or explanation. The only exception to this being Penguin, which he doesn't have many scenes at all, but I think that gives a very good lesson of just because you have more screen time doesn't mean more development. And if you just think that they're crazy, well, this leads me to my next point. They're just crazy is an excuse. This isn't true. People are naturally drawn to bad people not because they're just bad, but because of how they change. How does a person become like this? They ask themselves. Furthermore, why people are drawn to good guys not just because they're good, but because of their struggle to be good, or even their change to be good. Granted, this isn't in every story, but this is something in humanity. So what did I just mean in all that? I mean that there is a change and people are drawn to that change. That's the whole reason art exists in the first place, is to show change in a character through a story. So no, them just being crazy isn't an argument, it's an excuse. 3. How they can be replaced with better ones. The strangest yet most interesting things about these villains is how different they are compared to their comic book counterparts, with the exception of Harvey, at least at the end. Now, like I've said before, this is okay. My only question is, why? Why have Penguin be a near anarchist when you could just pick anarchy? Why have Vicky Vale be able to take on Batman when you have Azrael? Why have Lady Arkham have chemicals that alter the mind when you just have Scarecrow, who can do the same thing, if not more? Again, it's not bad because they made them different, it's just questionable because they have characters/villains that better fit with the villains they've previously intended and changed to their own versions. I know, after all I've said, you'd think I'd want less villains, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I know, having more villains would hurt the story, but I don't think that's quite so. Like I'm going to mention in this upcoming section, having a villain of the episode might overall help with the focus and or villains of the plot. I think this also would kill a lot of downtime we have each episode, letting things like filler be less often. Cinematography, art style, quick time events, and music. The cinematography is passable, which is a shame because this engine is to better help with things like lighting, graphics, but the cinematography doesn't seem to take advantage of this. All of the shots are pretty basic. Example, shot reverse shot, and every now and again you go for a good looking shot only for the episode title. Art style is pretty flat. I get it, they wanted to try and do a Wolf Among Us type deal, but the big difference between the two is that Wolf Among Us uses a lot of color, and dark color at that, that makes things like the edges stand out. But here's the big difference. Batman Telltale only uses light to mild colors, so everything just kind of blends together, making everything look flat and basic. Most of the QuickTime events are unnecessary. For example, there are so many times where I ask, do I really need a button prompt for this? But most of the time, it's fine. After a while, you start to find out that there is a rule set to most of the buttons. Well, most of the time. The music is horrible. At first you think, yeah, it's alright because it sounds pretty standard. You got the loud strings crescendoing, has like the whole song, and then you have the basic tension for the song, which is just drums the song, but that isn't what makes it awful. You see, the music itself is passable, but the sound mixing is awful. Every time you open the main menu, you're blasted with never-ending crescendos. Oh, you don't like that? Well, how about every time you watch the recap, the looping drums are there to greet you. Every single time.
A revolution is knocking on Gotham's door. When this whole thing starts, make sure you're on the right side.
Mr. Wayne, thank you for opening your house to us. Together, we will change Gotham. Harvey Dent, Gotham's next mayor, and eager to know you.
Vicky Vale, not interested, and reporter for the Gotham Gazette. Carmine Falcone? Is the Dent campaign soliciting votes from Gotham's biggest crime family?
Episodic is better with this formula. Now, I said I wouldn't give out many ways to fix this game, but for this one, I'll make an exception. Now, what do I mean by formula? I usually mean the style they tell their story. So, how do they tell their story? Well, episodically. At least that's the way I think it should go. So why don't we have a villain for each episode, much like a TV show, while Lady Arkham is the overall villain of the game? Not only would this help the game, that way there's less filler, but also gives one-on-one time to some villains, that way you can focus on them for development. The funny thing is that they already tried this with episode 1 being about the mob and Falcone, and episode 5 mostly being solely about Lady Arkham. But after a while they just forgot about it, even though there was clearly an attempt to make their episodes, well, more episodic. Thing is, like I've already mentioned, this could solve a lot of their problems. Example, Harvey has the problem that his change isn't believable due to him having a lack of development. So have a whole episode about his change into Two-Face. Simple as that. It's obviously not the easiest thing to do, but it certainly makes life easier. Choices and how only the right ones matter. Let me first start off by saying that there are good choices in this game, especially around episode 4. And let me also say, I'm not expecting a ton of decisions with hundreds of endings. All I want is for most of my choices to matter. You know, like every time it loves to remind me when I start an episode. And when I add up all my choices, they just don't matter. It seems like this game has a path, and as soon as you go off of this path, the game not only makes it less sense, but jerks you back on track. Example, back in episode 2, there's a choice where you get to confront the mayor. If you choose to go as Bruce, you can make a deal with him to pull funds from Harvey. But after this, the mayor just dies, and Harvey never mentions the funding thing ever again. So I guess that's the end of that. And that happens pretty often in this game, where the game will just let you do something morally questionable, only to reverse it later. So I ask, why have it in the first place, if you're only gonna backpedal on it? And this doesn't happen to just morally gray decisions, this happens whenever you make choices the game just doesn't want you to make. Again, another example of this is Harvey. Like I've mentioned in my Harvey section, if you keep saving Harvey, he makes no sense. Because nothing bad happens to him, and then he just suddenly goes crazy. This is what I'm talking about when I say the choices don't work if they're the wrong ones. Do you see the problem? This is a choice game where you make choices, and if those choices don't matter, then what does? The end. This is a bad game, whether from its story plots through the plot holes, whether it be from the bad characters to its nonsense motivations, whether it be from bad choices to its useless outcomes. It's a bad game through and through. Much like the beginning, I don't know how to end this. So I'll end with a long-winded rant. There are so many damn problems. I could talk about the bad characters, to the bad plots, to the bad choices, to the bad episodes even. At its core, it's mediocre at best, but it's the execution that's a mess. A good example of this is the villains, like Penguin. On his own, he isn't bad, it's just the lack of screen time that is. Lady Arkham isn't bad, it's just the lack of explanation is. Harvey isn't bad, it's just the bad choices and lack of setup is. Like I've said, it's the base that isn't the problem. It's the execution of these ideas that leads to these massive flaws. And it's not just the villains, it's the whole game that falls into this problem. Another example of this are the episodes. While some are good, like episode 4, the rest are either painfully boring and mediocre, or just straight up bad, or they're just mixed. There's no consistency to this game, whether it be from good to bad. And like I've said before in the intro, I don't hate this game. But there are so many problems that it becomes a bad experience. And if you still do believe, somehow, it's a good game, can you explain these problems? Like the Wayne corruption plot. Why was it only used for plot reasons rather than a real purpose? Why are there so many villains that are so poorly used? Why are the episodes so inconsistent? Why is Catwoman so annoying? It just never ends. And I haven't even touched upon things like the acting and the awful frame rate. And I have purposefully ignored those just to give this game a chance. Because if you were to force me to play this game again, I would. But that doesn't stop or erase the game's flaws and massive problems. And my nail in the coffin is this. What makes this Batman different? It's not the brutal versus not brutal Batman, because that fails. It's not choosing between Bruce or Batman, because again, it fails. It's not the early years as Batman, because that's been done before in year 1. And it's not even as playing as Batman, because Batman Arkham already does this. So again, I ask, what makes this Batman different from all the other previous Batmen? You can't, because there's nothing. At the end of the day, this game suffers a lot, whether you want to believe it or not. The fact is, it's there, and it's not going away any time soon. Part 5? Question mark? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Part 5, a part that I did not expect to add, but I'm adding it anyway for the sake of clarification. Now, for those of you that thought this video was long enough, I'm giving you free permission right now. You can click off right now. Completely up to you. I understand completely. This last little bit's just to address a few problems I might have with the video. So, yeah, so if you don't really care about it, you can leave. Like I said, you have my permission. So we'll be covering a couple of problems. They'll appear in text, and then I will be covering them. Kind of freestyling, if you will. I don't really have anything planned for this. Yeah, I know I did that. At first I thought it was like not a good thing to compare other things to other games, but as I'm going along and learning as a person, comparing it to things is very important. And I think one of the main reasons I compared it to other things was to help my argument and my point with certain things. But I'll make sure to do more comparing in the future. Obviously, when it comes to, more other things that I want to explain. But, yeah, I said I wouldn't, but I did anyway. Oh well. By the way, for those of you that are wondering, why couldn't I just fix these things? Well, you see, I've already taken too much time as is. This video has been taking months to actually create, so I don't want to slow down the process, especially when I'm right there at the finish line. So that's what this section is trying to do, essentially. Yeah, I know, I'm not exactly a good editor, but I've been trying my best to kind of make it better as it goes. As you can kind of see, part 1 is like, okay, done, but like by the time we get to part 4, it gets better. So I've been trying to grow as an editor, trying to learn when to cut and how to cut where, making things transition into other things just for cool effect, I guess. But yeah, I've never been a good editor. One of these days, maybe. One of these days. So So apparently I said that Harvey was better than Catwoman, or at least that's the way it comes off. And I would like to say, yeah, I still believe that. While I do think that Harvey's problems are more problematic, I also think that he has the higher highs as well. So I kind of like Harvey more because he actually kind of goes through a change, more or less. At least if you take the right path, he makes sense as a character. Versus Catwoman, she just switches back and forth. No matter what choices that you make, she'll be the same character whatsoever. Versus Harvey, if you actually make the good choices, then he actually starts to, I don't want to say grow, I'd say more digress as a character. So yeah, just for clarifying that. So yeah, Harvey is better than Catwoman. But of course, you can have a different opinion. Crazy, I know, right? Yeah, okay. I said the mayor choice was apparently good, but and then some other times I used it as a bad. Okay, so let me clarify what I mean by that. Up to that point where you get to make that choice as Bruce is good. Like, all that is good. It's just right at the end when they kill him and make that choice never brings up again. It's kind of when cobbling all the choices together. That's kind of the way I want to put it. When you look at the overall choices, it just doesn't really matter. The first, like, as their own individual choices, it's good. But as a broader scale, it's not good at all. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I actually don't believe in this. Okay, so by the time I was writing and capping the script, I believed in it. But about more than nearly 85% of the way through, I had a change of mind. Mostly because I talked to somebody else, and then once laying out fully the argument, I kind of, like, it's kind of impossible for objectively to be good or bad, because that requires a subjective lens on its own. You can't just objectively say things are good or bad. And that was my fault, obviously. But why did I leave it in there is the bigger question. The reason why is because I know it will piss off people. And just because it kind of pisses off people, I kind of want to put it in there. I know that I'm wrong about it, and I'm saying it right now. I'm thoroughly wrong about it, but I just want to do it to kind of piss people off. As you can see, I like to annoy people and press the right buttons, and I think that kind of does that quite well. Okay, and that's it. Yeah, I'm done. Fucking finally. I can't believe it, but by the time I'm doing this, I'm actually kind of done with this project. I've been working on it so long that it's almost become a myth to me that I will actually finish this. But we're right at the end. This is the end. It's crazy to me. Obviously, I want to give thanks to all the people that kind of encouraged me or gave me any positive feedback or any feedback in general for this. And hopefully I will be making more of these because these are awesome. I love doing them. Like, every part of the way I felt great actually making something. And I think it might actually age well compared to all the other past content that I've done. So yeah, I'm actually proud of this, and I'm done. So obviously, I want to say thank you to you if you stuck all this way somehow, and for everybody else, really. I don't know what to say. I'm actually shocked. So thank you. Yeah. What am I gonna do now? Ooh, I can do my flip. Bringing down the borders, lefty boys, trans... Right. I don't know what that was.